none of us are free unless all of us are free. It's not enough for me to say I feel free in my body if other people can't walk into the world and exist free of harm in their bodies. So it's really like, how are we working to dismantle the systems that are making it difficult for all of us to exist, and to do that and exist well and exist free of harm and free of discrimination.
Hi. Okay, welcome to the show, Chrissy. I'm so excited to have you here. Thanks for doing this with me.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm like so excited to chat with you today.
I was telling you offline before we started that I was a little nervous about our show. I went for a walk with my daughter last night and I was like, I'm having this girl, Chrissy King, on the show, and I'm really nervous. And she's like, why? And I was just telling her, I'm like, I think it's because I respect your work so much. And I think it's so needed right now, especially in this like online wellnessy space and like the culture that we find ourselves in right now with a lot of not like getting into like election stuff. Like there's just like it's really needed right now, your voice. And so I just really respect and appreciate your work so much. And so I was telling her, I'm like, I'm gonna channel my nervousness into just excitement. so
Oh,
so
well, I was gonna say thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that, and I'm always honored just to like have the opportunity to share my work anywhere I can, because I agree with you that I feel like right now, yeah, there's a lot of it's. I think it's just necessary more than
yeah.
ever, which is really interesting because when I first published my book, it came out in 2023, but I was writing it in 2021, and I felt like we were in a place where a body neutrality, body liberation, it felt like very much on like an incline.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, maybe people won't even really need this book anymore. And then like
Yeah, yeah.
fast forward to 3 years, how wrong was I? So
I
yeah.
feel like it's even more needed now. Isn't it funny how like you're like it's I feel like it's like we're just unpeeling like another layer of the onion and getting to the core of it.
Absolutely.
So I want to share with you a little bit because you and I are new friends getting to know each other. I want to share with you a little bit kind of about like why your work spoke to me so much. And then I want to dive into and have you share with everyone who doesn't know you a little bit about you. But just so you know, I found myself sort of accidentally in the wellness space a few years ago. I was a blogger, but a food blogger. Was a chef before having kids, and so I started this food blog. Like not no interest in the wellness space whatsoever. But I'm a meditator, and so I started sharing about like my meditation practice, and people started joining me to practice meditation. And so I sort of like organically fell into this wellness space. And pretty quickly into it, I was like, wait a second, this feels weird. Something feels something feels off here. And I couldn't pinpoint what it was. And I have a really limited experience in the world, right? Like it's just the experience that I've had. So I can't speak to everyone else's experience, but from what I was looking at in the online wellness space, I was like, wait a second, this feels all one note. And it feels like we're all after this one unattainable thing. And the thing that really got to me is all the women that I was working with, when they'd come to me, they wanted this feeling of ease and freedom and more peace and more joy. And they were finishing, no matter how much effort they put into it, still feeling really stuck. And I kept asking myself, what is it? And I was starting to realize, I think it's because we're not getting to the root of what's really going on that's keeping women stuck. I think we're keeping it really surface level. And I think we're not addressing really some of the bigger issues about why women are feeling stuck. And as a white woman new in the wellness space, is like, this feels uncomfortable for me because I don't know how to address some of this. And so I've taken a step back in a lot of my meditation courses this past year to examine sort of like, what is it? What are some of the root issues keeping women really stuck? Because until we all can be more honest and live free, none of the women I'm working with are going to live free. Like that's not going to happen until we're all feeling that way. And so I came across your book and it was like, yes. And now granted, I know yours is a different background in more of like the fitness space, but it was saying the same exact thing of like, oh, okay, none of us are going to feel better. None of us are going to feel free until we start addressing some of these bigger systemic issues. And then maybe we have a chance at true freedom and true peace and liberation. So from a personal standpoint, I know our lived experiences are very different, and yet the sentiment of your book really spoke to me. So that's why for me, I was like, okay, I need to have this girl, and she knows a few things. And so it's really relevant. And I think a lot of the women who are listening here are into being mindful and taking care of themselves and taking care of their homes and their communities. And so I think that this is something like we all want to talk about and yet don't really know how to. So anyway, so that's sort of like the background of what I'm having on. Can you share, for those who don't know you, a little bit about your background, maybe even starting with your fitness journey and you getting into fitness journey and like what made you like spark this idea of body liberation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing your background. And I think what you said that like really resonates with me is that, which I'll talk about in a minute. Like, yeah, my journey to this work was very much through fitness and like my own personal journey, but we're all coming to the same place, right? And I think that the thing, like you spoke about, the thing that we're all looking for, which is actually liberation, no matter what your background is, it all takes us back to the same point, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important. And I think what's also important right now is that when we're like just trying to exist in the world, we're trying to figure out
Yeah.
all these things. It's like I'm expanding when I talk about liberation beyond just the body, because it's like, what does it truly mean to live a liberated life, right? Like in
Yeah.
all ways. Okay, but before I get into all that, a little bit about myself. I grew up in the Midwest. I live in Brooklyn now, but I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up. I was homeschooled until I was in the third grade, and I went to a private Christian school. Like when I was in third grade, and I was the only Black girl in the class. There was only two other Black kids in school, my brother and my sister. And I was already 5'8" in third grade, which is very tall. I'm
Hmm.
5'11" and a half now, so I'm almost 6 feet. I was 5'8" in third grade, so I not only was I the only Black girl in the class, I was taller than everybody else, including the teacher. And I think from that very first exposure, like being exposed in a classroom for the first time and seeing that I was like different from everybody else, right away it made me feel like I had something to prove. Like I had to be the
Yeah.
best at everything. I had to be the smartest. I had to be the most well read in the class. I had to do all these things because I felt like I did not fit in a lot of ways. And then, throughout that, being at that school and just like growing up, I felt like I did not look like everyone else, and I did not see myself really reflected back. And at that time, this is like, I grew up in the 90s. So the age of the supermodel, right? And so the
Yeah.
only people that I saw like in media that really looked like me as a Black woman was like Naomi Campbell and like Tyra
Yeah.
Banks, America's Next Top Model, right? Like that was the age, that
Yeah.
was what I was watching. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to be tall, then I need to be thin, right? That's the only aspect of beauty that I have. And so from a very, very young age, that was the focus. I remember like a few years ago, my mom was moving, and so we were like going through all this stuff in the basement, just collect all this stuff. And I found a diary that I had from when I was like 10, I think it was 11, and it was marked January 1st, and I was talking about like my diet plan, my exercise plan, and how I could only have
Oh,
300 calories for breakfast. This when I was 11 years old, and
oh, that makes me
here's
cry.
here's the breakfast I can have: 300 calories, only 3 grams of fat. I don't know what I was going to eat for 3 grams of fat. I don't even know
Yeah.
why I was thinking about this at 11, right? But
Hmm.
already my mind was on that. And then I talk about my first like real diet when I was 16. I was at a public school then, like completely different environment, lots of people who looked like me. And this boy I went to school with, he made a joke about like he could tell I'd been eating good to like in
Hmm.
front of my peers to like bring light to the fact that I had gained weight. It was like a pretty difficult time in my life. My parents were going through a divorce. There's a lot of chaos happening, and I think I like knew that I gained weight, but it wasn't something that was like top of mind or bothering me. But then I was like, oh, this is a problem. People have noticed. So I drove myself to the bookstore, right? And I bought
Yep.
the book, The Atkins Diet.
Oh my God, I remember that. Yeah, good stuff.
And I heard
Yep.
about my friend talking about how she lost weight. I had no idea about like how to lose weight, like actually. So I bought this book. I followed that diet religiously,
Mm,
and very
mm.
quickly lost a lot of weight, probably like 30 or 40 pounds. And what happened for me though is that at school, all my peers were like, oh my God, you look so good. How did you do it? I want to do your diet. And so then I was like, oh, it solidified in my mind that people like me better when I'm in a smaller body.
Yeah.
And so essentially, I spent the next decade yo-yo dieting, doing all these very unsustainable things. And in my early 20s, I would say, early to mid 20s, I kind of got tired because I was like yo-yo dieting, losing the same 30 pounds over and always in unsustainable ways. So I finally was like, I'm going to start working out. I'm going to like figure this thing out once and for all. I joined a gym. I started strength training. Absolutely hated it. It was like the
Mhm.
first session I had was terrible. It was 30 minutes. I was like, this is the worst thing in my life.
Mhm.
But I had paid for like a package, so I'm like, I have to keep going. And funny thing is, eventually, like, by the end of the 12 sessions, whatever, I was actually starting to like it a little bit because I could see like these small incremental changes in my strength. And not
Yeah.
necessarily numbers on the scale yet, but in my strength. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And it was like the first time I thought, like, oh, maybe my body can be something more than just like how it looks. Like maybe there's some
Yeah.
utility in strength. Long story, there's so much to that story, but I eventually started powerlifting, which I loved. And for people who don't know, powerlifting is like a strength sport that's based on deadlift, um, squat, and bench press,
Okay.
and competing to like get the highest score you can. And so I started deadlifting and practicing and competing, and I ended up deadlifting like up to 500 pounds, which is like so cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so I got really, really strong, which I loved. However, at the same and I had like what you would call a physical transformation, right? So I was like the leanest I'd ever been,
Yeah.
I was the strongest I'd ever been, but at the same time, I was the most miserable in my body
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
And I got to this place where I was getting all this external validation from people about how I looked. People would walk into my gym and tell my trainer, I want to look like her, like all the things you would think would make me happy, but I was so miserable. I was so unable to enjoy a social life. I didn't, because I was so hyper focused on what I was eating, when I was going to work out. And I had what I call like my rock bottom moment. I was married at the time, and
Mhm.
my worst fear was like going on a vacation or going on like a weekend.
Mm, mhm,
That
mhm.
meant I couldn't have like total control over everything that I ate.
Yeah.
And so we had this weekend getaway. I was like anxious about it the whole week. And then I decided that like to control as much as possible, I would pack as many of my meals as I could for the weekend. And so we had this day, we're at the water park. We left for lunch. And with all of my in-laws family, there's like quite a few people. We go to this restaurant. I stay in the car to eat this sad little wrap that had been in the cooler
Yeah.
all day. And my ex and my in-laws were really kind, I guess. So they asked the restaurant if I could put food in and said like I had dietary restrictions or whatever. So I brought my little wrap in, but I was pretty much almost done with it at that point. And then I just
Yeah.
sat at the table and I watched everybody ordering food. It smelled good. They were enjoying themselves. Like everyone was just like eating a normal part of life.
Yeah.
And I sat there in that moment and I was like, well, I'm so miserable, right? Like I'm in
Yeah.
the weakest I've ever been. I'm the strongest I've ever been. And I'm still so unhappy. And that's when I realized like I'm going to spend the rest of my life like this if I don't address something. And so that's the point at which I realized like, oh, my body isn't the problem. I need to explore my relationship with my body image, and also like understanding that like being the smallest version of myself isn't actually going to be the thing that brings me joy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
life is far too short to live like this forever. And I was, in my 20s at this point. I'm like, I can't do this forever. And so that's the point at which I started, evolving into trying to figure out what body image means. I started reading books. I started trying to understand, and eventually led me to the work I'm doing now.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. What like it was multiple decades then of that leading up, I mean at age 11 already feeling like your body is something that had to be controlled, to be feared, that you couldn't trust yourself, and anytime and the thing is even though your story is very different from so many women can relate to this idea of feeling unsafe in our bodies and feeling this need to control it and having the validation of our worth be tied to something external, something outside of us, of like, must see me in this way because who I am, just myself, whatever size, shape, color, whatever, is not okay. And that is a very, real thing all women experience. At what point, and what I love so much about what you're doing now is you're really taking this exploration into self-worth and body liberation and tying it with the social justice piece.
Yeah,
So correct me if I'm wrong, but your education, you were a social justice major at Marquette, is that correct?
that is correct. Yeah.
So this is something you've always been passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been passionate about social justice since I feel like I came out the womb. I don't even, I
Yeah.
did so many things when I was younger. I was always like, every time I like learn about something, I was like worked up and fired up about it. And it wasn't like
Yeah.
something my parents were really like into. So I don't know where that came from, but like I remember being very young and like learning about like child labor in other countries. And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I just always getting myself into trouble, I guess, with adults
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
adults like she's the kid, what does she know? But I remember like arguing kind of or like having a debate when I
Yeah.
was young with one of my mom's friends about like child labor laws, and she wanted to start this business and she was going to outsource it to this other country, and I was like so passionate about this at a very young age. um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I double majored in sociology and social welfare and justice, and yeah, it's always been really integral to myself, and I think it because of that, like it is a part of everything I do, whether when I was working in fitness, the work I'm doing now, like social justice lens is always at the core of the work I do.
At what point did you start tying in your personal training and being a personal training expert and tying in this social justice piece and start sharing about it publicly and sharing your thoughts and like taking it a step further to be like, actually, it's not just about the weight you lose. Let me explain why this system is actually keeping you stuck and how it's rooted in white supremacy and
Yeah.
history of racism. Can you talk a little bit about when you started merging those two together?
Sure. And actually, I started merging them together even prior to my talking about body liberation. And I remember this because I was working full time. I had become a trainer on the side just because I
Yeah.
like love strength training and I loved like how powerful it made me feel. And I'm like, oh, I think so many women could like love the feeling of like just being strong in the gym. So I had become a trainer with like the encouragement from my personal trainer. And then I kind of was like, I would love to do this more seriously full time, but I think I was also like worried about the finance of it all because I was
Yeah.
working jobs I had been since college. I was making six figures in my job. Like I can't just like quit and become. Well, I could, but it wasn't
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
for me at that time. I didn't feel like I could just quit and become a trainer full time, right? And so I was scrolling on Instagram one day and I saw like this woman talking about like how she has a business coaching program for online coaches. And I don't know. Like I always think back to things of like, why did I just jump at things I really had no idea about because I had never heard of this woman before? But like something about it just spoke to me, and I was like, I'm gonna join this program.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking it was a little wild because I'm like, I don't know this person. It's $5,000. I don't know. Like I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. But I just like I got that feeling, and now I know, and I could talk about this more later. But there's so many times that I've gotten these feelings and I've just gone for it.
Hmm.
I don't even know why I'm doing this, but like I just know this is what the next step is. So, anyways, I joined this program, and this woman essentially was just like telling you how to start an online business, but she talked a lot about the importance of like having a blog and like an email list, stuff that I just never thought about. So I started blogging, and ironically, when I was a kid, I always said I was going to be a writer when I grew up, but then I went
Hmm.
to college, and I was just like, that doesn't seem stable, so forget that. So I started blogging and writing again, but when I was doing that, I was really writing a very like straightforward fitness content, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
here's how to do X, Y, and Z in the gym, or
Yeah.
here's whatever. And I felt like it was really boring and really bland. And I
Hmm.
also felt like discongruent because in my personal life, I was talking about like feminism and I was talking about racism. I was talking about all these things,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
these issues in the fitness industry because I started going to like fitness events and conferences and I would do these events and I'd be like, I don't see any representation on the stage.
Yeah.
Looks the same. Everybody has the same body type. Everybody has the same economic background and doesn't feel diverse. But I also didn't feel like this is back in like 2015, 2016. So we weren't talking about like all of these things within the wellness space that we are now. So
Right.
it felt like it didn't feel like a space where I should combine these things. But I remember I got like really fed up with something one day because I was trying to put together some graphics for like something I was designing for my business. And I Googled women doing push ups, and all of the women that came up were just like thin white women doing push ups. And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
it's
Yeah.
infuriating and like
Yeah. Yeah.
upset in that moment. So I started working on a blog and it was entitled Is Fitness Only for Thin White Women?
Hmm.
And I told my coach about it, my mentor about it, and she's like, yeah, this is great. You should publish it. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I didn't because I was scared, right? And also, let me just preface this story by saying I was scared, but also there was like nobody following me at the time, right? Like
Yeah.
I didn't
No,
have a
I get it. I get it. I
following.
get it.
My Facebook friends and family, and then like I had just started Instagram. I had like a couple hundred followers, which I'm not saying that's
Yeah.
not. It wasn't like I had some huge platform that I needed
Yes.
to like
Yeah.
this about, right? But I was, and so I remember I just sat on the blog for like several months, and then we had a call, and she brought it up. She's like, "Hey, I never saw that blog that you were going to publish," and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, I'm kind of nervous about it." And she more or less was like, you can say the thing you want to say in the world and make a difference, or you can choose not to. And I'm paraphrasing it, but it made me feel like, oh yeah, like if I want there to be a change in the industry, like somebody has to be the one to voice it, right? Even if it feels really scary. And I was still working at my corporate job then. So I had this day where I had to go on a work trip and I was going to be away from the phone for like a few hours while I was traveling. So I was like, I worked myself up and I'm like, okay, I'm going to post the blog. And
Yeah.
then I had run away from the internet. And then when,
Yeah.
I faced it for a few hours at least. And so I did that. So scared. Again, so scared. No one was even reading my stuff, but I was terrified. I posted this blog and then I went back on the internet a few hours later and I was like, in shock because it's the first article that people actually read and were sharing and it kind of went viral. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I did this thing that was really scary. And it wasn't even just the fact that it went viral. It was more like I was getting messages from people saying like, I felt this way for a really long time and I feel so seen and heard. And like, thank you for saying this thing.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, I like started being able to write for like self and women's health and just because of this article, like because I started talking
Yeah.
something that wasn't really prevalent yet. It opened up so many opportunities that really skyrocketed and changed the trajectory of my career in a lot of ways. And so that was in 2016 that I published that article. And so that was
Wow.
I really started merging my work. And I think what was really important for me is like, yes, I did the scary thing and it was scary. And of course, I did have some negative feedback that people weren't interested in talking about the intersection of race and wellness back then. So, of course, there were
Yeah.
like negative feedback, but there was also so much positive feedback of people saying, like, yes, I'm so glad we're finally having this conversation. And
Yeah.
so that was like a really big moment for me that really, really pivoted the way I did my work and really made me understand that, like, yes, the person I am offline and the person I am online can be the same person and I can
Yeah.
say the beautiful things.
I love that so much. I think that what you're talking about is this idea of like what you do now so much in your work about this idea of body liberation. It was also you just having a liberation of your voice, of being like, I can take my two worlds and they can merge together, and I have freedom to stand in my own agency to speak my truth, whatever that may be. And whether people agree with it or disagree with it, I'm going to make a choice to live my life in a way that feels in integrity. And I think that's what real freedom is to feel a safety in like your voice and just saying, speaking up about what the things you believe in. And so I think that's really beautiful that you were doing that really back in 2016. And then your book came out many years later. That's titled Body Liberation, but really you were already embodying that and practicing that, years before, which
Yeah.
is really, really inspiring and also just a really hard thing to do, like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is, it is. I think there are a lot of people who choose not to.
Yeah.
So
And I think too, just like even like I don't know if it was that time or like a little bit after I went to this book event by a Black woman who had just published a book, and she was talking about how she gets pushback because she talks about anytime you speak truth to power, you're gonna get pushback, right? And
yeah,
she's talking about like how she handles it. And I remember her saying like my job is to put the work in the world. How people respond to that's not my
yeah,
responsibility.
yeah.
And she just talked so much about like how she doesn't try to go and debate people in the comments. She doesn't even pay attention to them because it's like people who come to debate you are not interested in trying to understand your perspective. They're just coming to argue.
Yeah.
And that gave me so much freedom to be like, you know what? I don't even have to pay attention to the naysayers. My purpose is to speak the truth that I believe, and it will land where it's supposed to land or plant seeds where it's supposed to plant.
Mm,
And that's my work, right? How people receive
mm.
my work.
Yeah, yeah. You can only control yourself. We can't control how others interpret our voice or our opinions.
Yeah.
I love that so much. Okay, so speaking of, let's get into some of the things that you talk about so beautifully in your book. So I want to first just talk about like body liberation. Like, what does that really mean? I know we kind of touched upon that, but can you talk about for you, like, what does that really mean for you?
Yes. So I'm trying not to like belabor this point, but I think one thing for me is when I started delving into like body image, one of the first books I read is The Body's Not an Apology by Sonia Renee.
Yeah,
Beautiful
such a
book,
good book.
such a beautiful work. And it really helped me start to understand like the intersections of identity, like right, how race and how gender and how sexuality also affect our ability to feel good in our bodies, right? It's multifaceted. It's not just this
Yeah,
one part of you. And so that really helped me understand a lot of things. And then I read Fear in the Black Body by Dr. Sabrina Strings, and she really helped me understand that this idea of like thinness being ideal or fat phobia is dated back and rooted in white supremacy going back to slavery, right? Because again, if we look
yeah,
back at other times in history, being in a larger body was considered a good thing. It was a sign
yeah,
of wealth and prosperity. It meant that you
yeah,
had resources to feed yourself.
yeah,
Right? And even when we look at like ancient art, like people in larger bodies are memorialized. Like that was
yeah.
considered like a beautiful thing. And so it's like, how do we get to this place where all of a sudden being in a larger body is a bad thing? And that goes back to slavery. And so putting all these pieces together really helped me understand like this is more than just like I just don't like my body, right? It helped me really understand that this is
Right.
intentional, right? This is programming. This is white supremacy. This is the patriarchy. This is all by design.
Yeah.
But anyways, when I first started the journey, the first thing I really was drawn to was like body positivity. And I think body positivity for folks who are unfamiliar is like basically as it is now is really this idea that like we can feel good and positive in our bodies regardless of their shape or size. And
Yeah.
um, there is oftentimes, unfortunately, now a hyper focus on self love, which I can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But when I was doing this work and like reading these books, and I also came to understand that like body liberation, the original body liberation body liberation, body positivity movement
Yeah.
was founded by fat, Black, and brown women because they didn't see themselves as represented in mainstream society as beautiful. And it was also heavily, heavily rooted in social justice.
Yep. Yep.
Right? It wasn't just about like, can I feel good about myself? It was like, how can we undo these systems that are making it difficult for the most marginalized among us to feel good in our bodies and to feel safe in our bodies, right? It's not even just like feel good. Can I feel safe in my body
Yeah.
without being discriminated, right? And so then, but when we look at body positivity now, we go to like, you can go to Instagram, look at the hashtag. Oftentimes we see thinner body
Oh,
white women talking about they don't like their cellulite or they don't like their, or they're embracing their cellulite and they're embracing their stretch marks, right? And I think then I started to understand there's like a really big difference between I have a personal body image issue, which a lot of us do, right? We might not
yeah.
like our arms, we might not like our stretch marks, we might not like our cellulite, but that's very different than living in a body that's systemically oppressed, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I started to see like we're like the body positivity movement, once it became more mainstream, really lost that social justice aspect, and it really lost its roots and its history. And even this hyper focus on self love, right? I think what I noticed with body positivity is that all these people were like using the hashtag and saying, "Oh my gosh, I just love myself," and I was like, "Well, I still don't love myself, and now I'm failing at body positivity too."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
And it's like it's not even just like, I talk about in the book in detail. I think falling in love with yourself, greatest love story of all time. And also it's very difficult to do that in a system that tells you everything's wrong with you, right? And when
Yeah.
we focus on self-love as like the answer, then it puts the impetus on the individual, right? Like you're not doing
Yeah.
a good enough job at loving yourself. You're the problem versus saying, no, no, the system, it's a systemic problem, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the problem. It's not me that's the problem. It's not the individual. So when I was like going through all that, that's why I really lean towards body liberation, because when I talk about body liberation, I'm talking about number one, this real true understanding that at our essence and our core, our bodies are just the vessel that are allowing us to have this human experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, their like bodies are very political. I never stray away from that. And so there are implications for the bodies we reside in, of course. I talk about that. But really, our bodies are the keeper of our magic. It is allowing us to have this human experience. And also for me, it's really important for people to understand with body liberation. The goal is not that like one day you're gonna look in the mirror and love everything you see, because
Yeah.
that's not realistic, right? That's just not realistic. And I don't want anybody to set themselves up to believe that one day they're gonna reach this point where they never ever have another negative thought about their bodies. As long as you live in this vessel, you probably will have those thoughts, but you can learn to flip them sooner. You can learn to understand that these thoughts aren't mine, right?
Yeah.
These are thoughts that I've been taught. And so that's a big part of it. And then the other part, though, is really understanding the systems that would have us at war with ourselves while learning to find joy and freedom in the
Yeah.
body that we exist in. And
Yeah.
the last piece is this real understanding of collective liberation, right? As you started, you
Yeah.
already when we started the conversation, that is that none of us are free unless all of us are free.
Yeah.
It's not enough for me to say I feel free in my body if other people can't walk into the world and exist free of harm in their bodies. So it's
Yeah.
really like, how are we working to dismantle the systems that are making it difficult for all of us to exist
Mm.
and to do that and exist well and exist free of harm and free of discrimination.
Yeah, for all of us to exist in bodies that we feel safe, that we
Yes,
feel worthy, and
yes,
that we can do so collectively. So
absolutely.
much, there's so much. I mean, you touched upon so many big things in there, and so like I'm just trying to dissect it all because I want to like really get into some of this. I love the way you speak about body positivity because I will say, from just someone observing what, and it sounds like we're observing the same things, but from what I'm seeing on my feed or what I'm seeing people talk about is this idea of taking like hijacking body positivity and turning it into something where it's like you already sort of fit this Eurocentric ideal standard of what beauty is. And I'm not in any way denying anyone's lived experience that, like, of course, that you might still feel insecure about things. I understand that. But I don't think that, well, it's not what was originally intended on this idea of body positivity. I'm like, yes, of course, like we want you to feel you should feel loved and worthy. And we need to talk about the broader perspective of look at all of the people who don't feel safe in their bodies. And that's a very different thing than just like accepting cellulite versus I don't feel safe. I don't feel accepted. I don't feel seen. I do not get the same voting privileges. I don't have the same rights. I don't
Yeah,
have the same autonomy over my body, especially as
absolutely.
where we're getting into in today's culture. Like that's really what it's turning into is like you not having maybe like you Chrissy, not having the same rights over your body as another a person may have. That's what we're talking about here. And that's a very different thing to live in fear and to feel unseen than to just feel like, I don't necessarily like this about myself. I'm going to cover this. Not to minimize that, but they're not the same thing.
They're
So
not the same.
thank you for sharing that, because I think that that is like a confusing people thing that people talk about, like body positive. And I see it all the time. Women say like, I'm just trying to love and accept my body. I'm like, yes. And there's got to be more to the story here.
Yeah, and
So
everything you just said is so accurate, and also just like the freedom to exist in our bodies, right? I think of this for, like folks in larger bodies, like this whole world is set up for thin folks and for thin
yeah.
privilege. Right? And so just like access to clothing in stores, to be able to walk into
Oh,
stores with
it's
clothing
true.
in
Yeah.
to be able to ride or to be able to take an airplane and have seating that accommodates you, right?
Yeah.
To get access to healthcare and be taken seriously in the doctor. And not the first thing the doctor says is, oh, you just need to lose weight, versus like actually what are the medical issues that you're experiencing. It's like all of those things that I think when that's not your lived experience, it's hard for you to understand. Like, this is bigger than just, I don't like my cellulite. I don't like my,
Yeah.
it's like my ability to exist and like not be discriminated against, not be passed up for job opportunities, like all of these things that are real implications for people who live in larger bodies.
And I think what you just said is so important. And then just taking a step further, it's like for so many bodies are like, or not, if you're not able bodied or a trans bodied, all these different lived experiences, it's like, I think it can be hard for the woman who maybe fits the standard Eurotypical, like Eurocentric typical body to understand how that person not feeling safe and free still affects you.
Yes.
Do you know
Yes.
what I mean? I think it's easy to think like that's not really my problem. And I'm like, well, it actually is 100% your problem, because that's still why you're not liking your cellulite and can't
Yes.
accept it. And like
Yes.
until you can see that circle, you're
Yeah.
still going to be stuck in that cage. And like you can say as much as you want, like I'm confident in myself. As soon as you open social media, you get the messages of not enoughness, of your brokenness, of all the things that are wrong. And because it still stems in this idea of there is a hierarchy. There is someone who belongs and is acceptable, and then there are people who don't. And none of us will feel safe until that circle includes all of us. That's a really big conversation. That's a really hard thing to do. So I understand why people tend to shy away from, not excusing people, but like I feel like that's what happens is the women who fit the Eurocentric standard tend to
Mhm.
shy away from the conversation because it doesn't apply to them, if you will.
Yeah, I just went on a TikTok rant about this because TikTok is the place where it just makes my head hurt, honestly. Makes my head hurt so much. But there was this large creator who made a video recently about being thin is her favorite thing to be, and she's
Oh, okay, okay.
and so like wildfire, right? And it's so interesting to watch people's perspective, because there's people like on the body liberation side that are like pointing out the errors, and there are people on the other side being like, no, she's right, you do get treated better when you're skinny, so that's accurate. And I made a video going in a rant about this because what I'm trying to help everyone understand here is that, similar to what you just said, in order for you to say, I like being thin because I get treated better, you're acknowledging then that there are systems that there's a hierarchy, and
Mhm,
what you're really saying is, I like benefiting from this hierarchy. So I'm not
mhm.
concerned in dismantling it because this is the way that I benefit, right? And
Yeah,
in my TikTok, I went on this whole rant because I'm like, it's no different than a white person coming on the internet and saying, my favorite thing about myself is that I'm white because I get treated better when I exist in the world.
yes,
Or my favorite thing is that I'm wealthy because I get treated better because of classism, racism, thin privilege, fat phobia, they all fall under the same system that's harming every single one of us, right?
yeah,
So this idea that you are going to play into the system that will benefit you and somehow it's going to save you is literally one of the like ruses of white supremacy, right? That
yep,
somehow if
yep.
you play the game right, you'll be higher on the hierarchy and you won't be harmed as much, which keeps us all trapped in the system. Because if we all were just like, oh, wait a minute, we need to do away with this system,
Yes,
systems aren't,
yes,
yeah,
yes. No, 100%. And I think it's easier to see when you talk about race.
yeah,
It's a little harder when you talk about thinness because people are like, no, I don't see it, especially because they can equate it to quote unquote health or something. You'd be
yes,
like, well,
yes.
we have other reasons why we feel that way. You know, they
Yeah,
can just, the justification, there's a lot of cards that get pulled out to justify
absolutely.
concern or
Yes.
um, why it's not quite equal playing fields. But
Yeah.
yes to everything you just said.
Yeah, so
No.
it is hard for people to see, but it's also so necessary, right? And one of the things I talk about in the book too is that once I came to a place of body liberation, which also really happened. What also really happened for me is like it freed up all of this energy, right? Because it takes a lot of
Mhm.
energy to be hyper focused on, work
Yeah.
and losing weight and exercise, all these things. It sucks the creative energy out of you, right? And so when I came to this place of body liberation, it was like my mind was clear again. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, like for the first time, I started to like think about what do I really want to be doing in my life because I felt like I was just like like just going with whatever because my mind wasn't even focused. And so once I did that, I was like, whoa, there's all these other things in my life that I actually, and that's another thing too, right? There's all these other things that I think are actually the problem. But when you feel like you're out of control, or oftentimes I feel that when other areas of your life feel out of control, or they feel too big to handle, the thing that is like the default is I can control my body. I
Yeah.
I can focus on
Yep.
that. But once you
Mhm.
stop focusing on that, then it's like, okay, I actually have to face the real the real issues that I'm having. And
Yeah.
oftentimes they're so much bigger than just what your body looks like.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like so often to what you're saying is like we live on this autopilot, and I think what happens is when we stop focusing our energy on trying to control our
Yeah,
bodies, whether it's to be smaller, to be richer, thinner, whatever it may be to fit some standard,
yeah.
our mind space frees up and we have the ability to step back because I think what happens is these from my understanding is these systems of oppression keep us stuck in this like autopilot of having to like perform and to make sure we're okay and make sure we're living up to it, that it uses up all of our conserved energy, it uses up all of our mind space, all of our creativity, and then we never get the chance to ask ourselves, what is it that I want? How
Yes.
do I want to feel? What does the life that I want to look like? What could I design a life that feels really good for me? And when women have the ability to start asking those questions of like, what would feel good for me? What kind of body would feel good? What kind of family would feel good? What kind of love would feel good? What career, like, then we really get to a point where we are a liberated society.
Yes.
And that is very, I think, I don't want to be like, scary for the system, but I really think that that's when things start to change.
You are bullseye, like bullseye. I just talked about this on my Substack you last week or the week before. Dieting and the focus on like looks, thinness, and prettiness is like the biggest sedation in history, right?
Yes.
Like if you
Yes.
keep women focused on that, you
Yeah.
can literally control them, right? Because again, like you said, that is scary to think of a woman who takes that energy and says, what kind of life do I want to create? What do I
Yep.
want to do with my life? What would feel good? What kind of
Yeah.
life do I really want to create? And I've been saying this repeatedly because I just feel like people aren't getting it. I don't think it's a coincidence that we are in this place politically where like literally rights are attempting to be stripped from particularly from
Yeah.
women. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's coalescing with like 90s 2000s fat phobia and diet culture.
Mm.
Like it
Mhm.
is so by design, it's so
Yeah.
intentional to keep us distracted. And that's why I just like want to shake people. Like this whole thinness conversation's gone online. I'm like, hello. Like I
Yeah.
just because it's true. Like society is scared of women who stand in their power and decide I
Yeah.
want to make choices and a life that feels good for me and that I don't have to follow societal standards. I don't have to follow the
Yeah.
that I'm supposed to have. And I talk about this, I'm writing another book, which I won't get into too much here, but I'm talking just a lot. I'm having a lot of conversations about the fact that like I once I, came to this body liberation space, I decided to leave my marriage, not because I had like a bad marriage,
Mm.
wonderful person, but I got married when I was 22. I was a baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? I never stopped to think about, oh, what do I really want in life? And so when I got married, I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna have 4 kids, we're gonna do all these things because I
Yeah.
thought that's what you had to do. Like I never considered what do I want for myself. And then I decided I didn't want to have kids. And, that was like really, I think difficult for a lot of my family to like my mom, my ex to like conceptualize that I don't want to do these things that I always just thought you would do. And even when I talk about being child free in line, like it's so much negative feedback. And I'm like, oh, because the world doesn't like when women just decide this is
Yeah.
what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make the choices for myself that I want to make, right? Because when you really decide, like, there's nothing, in my opinion, revolutionary by deciding you don't want to be a parent or you don't want to have kids. But the fact that people react so negatively, like you're doing something to harm them personally,
Yeah.
is like wild to me. And I'm like, oh, they just don't the world just doesn't like women who make choices for themselves.
Yeah, it's threatening.
Yeah, it's threatening. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm so glad you're talking about this, and I didn't know you were working on a second book, but
Yeah.
okay, now I'm like dying to get the second book. Okay, this is really why I was so excited to talk with you. I think what you're doing is you are a woman who is saying like, I'm no longer going to be in this cage.
Yes.
And I am coming out of it. And all of a sudden, it's like you're seeing the world for the first time and you're like, wait, I get to pick. I
Yes.
get to choose what I want. Do I want kids? Do I not want kids? Do I want to be married? Do I not want to be married? And I will tell you, as a woman who I don't have any regrets necessarily about my life, but I did not ask those questions.
Yeah.
You know, I got married after school. I married the good guy who my parents loved. And I will say, like, we do have a good marriage now, but it has been a rocky road. We were both like, are we going to stick in this? We're going to do this. I had baby after baby after baby. I left my career to stay home and take care of these kids because financially I didn't make enough long way of saying I'm now in my mid 40s asking myself, wait a second, like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize I had a choice. And I
Uh-huh.
do believe it was because I was playing on all this is what a good woman does. This is what a good
Absolutely.
woman does. And
This is the mold.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And I really think it's beautiful what you're doing now, especially at this phase of your life, to set yourself up and be like, I get to choose. I
Yeah.
get to choose. Whether it's about kids, whether it's about marriage, whether it's my body, whether it's my career, my voice, I get to choose. And I think that that's the ultimate liberation. And
Absolutely.
it's a beautiful example. And I think what you have done is it really started by something to say, like, I'm going to give myself my power back about not controlling my body. And
Yes.
how that then, and what I think is a beautiful example and I want women to see is then that snowballs into every other decision. And it snowballs into this big, beautiful, rich life that I don't think we know we're denying ourselves
Yeah.
until we reclaim it. And you're like, wait a second, this is so good. I was wasting so much time and energy on the like faux self-love,
Yeah.
like faux self-care and bubble baths. I didn't really realize that like it could feel this good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was gonna say one thing, and I think too, like I'm so excited to share more about this because I also think like, when I also moved across the country like after I got divorced, and I moved from Wisconsin to New York to Brooklyn, and I like had to figure like I didn't know what I was doing, but I gave myself the freedom to just explore and to trust myself.
Yeah.
That no matter what happens, I can figure it out. And I also
Yeah.
gave myself the freedom to allow people to be disappointed. Because
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you
yeah,
choose to do the thing that feels best for you, there probably will be people that will be disappointed by your choices. And you just have to say, you know what? People get to be disappointed and
yeah,
I get to make the choices that feel best for me. And I can trust that because I always told myself I didn't know what I was doing to move to New York. I said this could be great. It could be the worst thing ever. But what I do know is that I can always go back to Wisconsin if it doesn't work out. I can always like I'm not making decisions that are irreversible, right?
yeah,
And when and I say this is so important because I did things that really were difficult. I don't think I realized as I was going through it just like how difficult the things I were doing.
yeah,
But now, having been in New York 5 years, my life is completely different. I felt like that version of myself and is a whole different. It's a whole different person, right? I'm like, oh, this is
yeah,
my life. I'm living in the second part of my life, and it's such a beautiful thing to see what can happen when you give yourself the freedom and the power of choice, and just say, I just want to see what happens. I'm just going to
yeah,
follow the thing that feels good. And just like I talked about earlier, like I got that feeling I have to sign up with this business coach. I don't know why. I got the feeling I need
yeah,
New York. I don't know why. I got this feeling that I need to write this article, which then eventually led to me writing the book. Like you just, if you follow those
yeah,
impulses and those urges, you can experience a life that feels really beautiful.
yeah,
And it doesn't mean it's not without, disappointments and sad, like all the emotions that we always have still happen. And yet I'm like, well, I'm so grateful that I made those choices.
yeah, yeah. No, I get that so much. I'm also a similar person who gets these like intuitive hits.
Yeah.
And I'll say to like my partner, my family, like, I don't really have a choice. I just have to do this. I don't know why. It's something is like making me do this. It's like I don't want to do it. It was like when I started the podcast, I'm like, I don't really think I want to do this, but something's making me. Like it's bigger than me, which asks there's a question I've been thinking about with you. And I'm so curious because this is something personal for me that's changed. So I'm assuming I don't want to assume what kind of how religious your home was, but you went to Catholic. Did you go? It was Catholic school.
It was private Baptist school. I grew up
Okay,
Christian. I grew up very, very
Okay.
Christian, like very, very, very,
Okay.
like went to church
And
multiple times a week, Christian.
and we don't need to like I don't want to talk about something you definitely if you don't want to talk about, but I'm just curious for you as you've now become more, I'll just say like empowered and liberated. I also have heard you talk so much about feeling these synchronicities in your life that to
Mhm.
me feel like faith. It
Yeah,
feels like a type of faith.
yeah.
I'm curious if you wouldn't mind speaking about, and I don't know if it has or hasn't changed, but your evolution of like the religious part that you had as a young girl. It's like where you are now, because it feels to me like you have a really strong faith just by
Yeah,
listening to you speak. But
yeah,
it feels, I'm guessing, potentially different from when you were younger. And so I'm like, wait,
absolutely.
I need to hear what this is like.
Yeah.
How does this evolve for you? Give us the story.
Yeah, so yeah, I grew up super Christian, like, Sunday school, regular church service, Sunday night church, Wednesday night Bible study, like all of the things. Like and it's really interesting because my mom is still very, very religious, very Christian. I the older I've gotten, the more that I don't feel like I align with organized religion, right? Now I'm
Mm,
very spiritual, like to your point.
yeah.
Like I believe in God, I believe in a higher power, I believe in like these synchronicities, I believe in like, you know, my spirit guides, like all of these things, right? I don't believe ascribe to organized religion anymore. And I think that has been something that I'm also going to talk about in the book, which is actually a little scary for me to talk about because,
Yeah.
and again, I talk about this disappointment thing, right? Because like, I don't know what my mom's going to feel like when she reads that.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, like, again, body liberation was a point of like unlearning something, right? And then when you unlearn,
Mhm.
then you start to question other things.
Yep.
You start to unlearn other things, right?
Yep.
And I think about how much, I think about how much religion even played into like so many of the decisions I made in life because there's so much shame around and guilt around like sexuality and just
Yep. Yep.
how I experience the world. Like, what am I supposed to do, right? What's a good Christian girl supposed to live like? And I think all of those influenced me in such a way that I had to really unlearn a lot of that programming. And I really had to start questioning. And like, I've actually never talked about this anywhere. So you're getting the tea here. I really had to start questioning my relationship, especially as a Black American woman. I had to start questioning my relationship with Christianity because, like, really,
Yeah.
Christianity was used as a tool of oppression for
Yeah.
enslaved people. And I'm like,
Yes.
that's ironic that, like,
Yes.
you know what I'm
Yes.
saying? So it's like I really had to like really question a lot of things. And I think that's a hard conversation for people to have. And like that's not even a conversation. I've lightly had the conversation with my mom, but like it really hasn't, that's not
Mm.
but like Christianity is so deeply rooted in the Black community, right? Again, for a reason, because going back to slavery, like Christianity was used not only as a tool of oppression, but then taught to us as um, like the religion that we should all be
Yeah.
believing in. And so I think about just like the history when we really, and I don't want people to be offended. I know this is like a very hard topic for people to really delve
Yeah.
into because of our own, we all have our religious beliefs. And so I'm not here to try to convince anybody of anything. But I think that when we start to think about the ways in which Christianity has been used to subjugate people across the entire globe, really, is something I think that we just have to really question. We have
Yep.
to
Yep.
really, and even if it's not like you're ready to be like, oh yeah, I understand why maybe organized religion isn't for me. I'm not saying that has to be the case, but I think we do have to interrogate the things that we've been taught and interrogate the true history of a lot of things. And so I think the more I've done that, the more I'm like, I don't necessarily feel like that aligns with me personally. I
Yeah.
always am going to have a relationship. I shouldn't say always, nothing's forever, but
Yeah.
I very, fairly strong, very strongly feel a relationship with a higher power, with source, with God, with universe, whatever you like,
Yeah.
whatever you like to use. Like you could not convince me that that's not real, right? Because I've just seen
Yeah.
your intuition, your the synchronicities, whatever you want to call it. Like I know very much that I have experienced that in a way that is very real for me. But religion comes with so much rules and so much guilt and so much shame. And
Yeah.
I can't really resonate with.
Yep.
And even this
Yep.
idea, like, Christianity is the only way. Like if you don't do, you're gonna go like every other religion is gonna burn in hell, right?
Yeah.
Except for, and so I just think when we start to think about things in absolutes like that, that's when I'm like, I think we have to just step back and like really examine, you know?
Yes. Yeah. I think this is the next layer for you. And I so appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that. I think it's actually how so many people feel right now. I, for one, am 100%. I'm in the same exact situation as you are. And that's the reason I wanted to bring it up because I've heard you talk about like your synchronicities and faith. And I'm like, this is very much how the phase of life I find myself in. I was raised Catholic. My kids all baptized in the Catholic church. They went to Catholic school. And it was like probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I started to feel like this is something here is again, like something's fishy, something feels off. I was like, I can't pinpoint it, but I'm pretty sure this isn't good.
Yeah.
And I don't won't go to detail, but I have a child who is exploring what love will look like for them, and I don't want to tell their story because they're still exploring that. But I know that if he were to find himself sitting in that church, his love would not be accepted. And that was a thing for me. And I was like, I no longer can participate in this. And I think that there's so much shame around on so many levels that organized
Mhm.
religion has. And I didn't mean for our conversation to go there, but since it did, we're just gonna just stay there. And so
Mhm.
for me, I've taken the middleman out of religion. And I'm like, I don't need man to tell me my relationship with God. And I've never felt closer to God at 40, almost 46 years old than I do right now. But it's funny, Kristen, I don't know if you'll relate to this, but I almost feel like it used to be something out there
Mhm.
and now I feel like it's in here. It's so deep in here. And I hear you talk about this idea of self love a lot. And it is almost this thing of like, I feel such a deep connection to source, God, whatever, again, you want to call it. And the sense of love that I feel for myself is this sense of like safety and security that I rest in something bigger than myself. And so the self love is not about an action, it's about a knowing of my own worth because that source lives within me. It's not in that church.
Yes.
It's not in that man who's going to
Yeah.
stand up at a pulpit. Like that is not my love. That's not love that I know.
Yes.
And that feels vulnerable and new for me as a woman in this midlife season of like, so what does that look like though now moving forward? And I don't know. I don't have answers for that.
No, but I think what you're saying like resonates so much with me as well. And like, what you were just talking about, like I think that the more I've stepped away from religion and again stepped into this idea of like source and like how connected I am, this also opens up so much space for self-compassion, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because I think when you're deeply rooted in religion, there's rules and there's like you did the wrong thing and there's like judgment, and there's shame, there's like, oh, I messed this up again and I did this thing that's wrong. And like when you like you said, take out the middleman, right? and
Yeah.
and I truly believe, this is my belief, like that every single one of us, right, is inherently worthy because we exist. There's nothing
Yeah.
else to,
Yeah.
right? And so like truly understanding that at like a soul level has also allowed me to realize like you can't get it wrong, right? Like
Yeah.
quote unquote mistakes or whatever you're doing, like if you can just really understand that like you are infinitely loved regardless, like regardless,
Oh.
right? You can show yourself so much kindness and compassion and gentleness, and that really is what for me like true self-love
Mm.
is about, right? That
Yeah.
I'm always
Yeah.
worthy, I always can treat myself with kindness and gentleness, and like even on my worst day I'm like, yeah, but I'm like infinitely loved and like it's okay, and it doesn't mean
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
bad, but it's like I don't need to walk around feeling guilt and shame every day. I don't need
Yeah.
to, even whatever mistake I think I made, right? Like I'm a human and this is our part of our humanity, and
Yeah.
everything is going to be okay. And the more you can lean into that, the more you can be like it's okay, everything is going to be fine. And
Yeah.
that true self-compassion is what self-love is about for me. And that
Yeah.
true like I don't even know, like I haven't really, I don't even really have the words to truly like express it right now, but it's like this true like sense of like I am so held by the universe, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And again, that doesn't mean, and I'm not saying this in like in a spiritual bypassy way, like we're not gonna have hardships in the world because,
Yes.
but like despite all of that, I know that I'm truly held by the universe and I'm truly loved and I don't have to ever question that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have to seek that validation from other people, right? And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that even if we're human, again, of course we want validation from other people, but like at the end of the day, I know that I always have me. I know that I know that God always has me as source, whatever it is, always has me. And like I can lean into that in those really, really difficult moments.
Yeah. No, God, that is so beautiful. When you were speaking, I found myself like tearing up, getting emotional because I felt like you were speaking what I'm experiencing right now. And I know that I'm just going to assume you feel the same way. Like, I want that for all women. Like, I want that so
Yeah.
deeply for them to understand what it is that you're saying, for them to actually embody that in their own life and to feel that.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the thing that the world is craving right now, is this sense of like, let me just take a deep, deep exhale to know that I'm okay. And I think it goes back to the very beginning, of your book and this conversation of understanding that like our body is just this vessel,
Yes. Yeah.
and that's it. And that like who we are just these like, we're just, pure source love, like just radiating at every moment and moving through this world, experiencing these things, doing the best that we can, trying to connect with other people. And I think when we can tap into that source that's bigger than us and remember that our worth is it's exactly what you said, is just intrinsically connected to our humanity. That's it. That it's
Yeah.
just, it can never be taken away. It's ever flowing. It's omnipresent.
Yeah.
And when you know that, you can at that point be like, okay, I don't need to step in this cage. I can step out of it. I can feel that freedom. I can feel that liberation. And I know you and I want that for all women. And even just like this conversation be one little step closer for someone listening to feel that sense of like, okay, I believe in myself enough to just try something on a little differently today.
Absolutely.
And I'm gonna we're close here in this conversation, but I mean, there's so many questions I still want to ask you, but I think this idea of like body liberation, you do such a beautiful job talking about like it's a never ending thing, that it is like we'll get one step closer today and we might take like 10 steps back. And I just like want whoever's listening to understand that like this is not a one and done thing. Like, you're not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, you know what, I'm actually okay with myself and I'm going to help liberate those around me. Can you just speak a little bit about like how this is an evolution and it's a practice and not necessarily a destination? That sounded really cheesy when I just said that, but
No, that's true. It is a daily practice. I talk about that all the time. It's truly a daily practice. And again, that was one of like my, I don't want to say my beefs, I guess I would say, with the body liberation or the body positivity space, because I think it sometimes feels like people have just arrived at this place of self-love and like now
yeah,
I and it's like that's not how it works.
yeah,
It is very much a daily practice. In the book I liken it to like brushing your teeth. You don't just brush your teeth once and then you're done. You hopefully brush them every day.
yeah,
Like your relationship with your body, and even when I say body, it's not even just your body, you yourself, right? Like
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah. I
I
agree.
in the book that like your relationship with yourself is, in my opinion, the most important relationship you have, right? You spend every moment of every day with yourself, period. And you will leave this earth with yourself, you know?
Yeah,
And so it's like how we talk so often about like how we pour into other people, and like all of those things are very important, but like the same kindness, compassion, grace, love, positive self-talk that we give other people, we are just as deserving of that ourselves. And
yeah,
so it is a daily practice to treat ourselves with kindness and compassion, and to treat our bodies and ourselves with that nourishment. Like how are we nourishing
yeah,
ourselves on a daily
yeah,
basis? And so there is no destination.
yeah,
Unfortunately, but like also that would be kind of boring.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Nation, right? It is a daily practice that never ends, and we are constantly evolving. And it's like you're peeling an onion. You peel a layer and you find
Yes, yes.
another thing, and there's another thing, right? Like, and I actually, when I think about that, that gives me a sense of joy almost, because I'm like, oh, I'm never done. Like, right?
Never done.
I am so inspired by so many people, but I think that the beautiful thing for me is that I'm like, I get to keep growing and evolving for as long as I get to be here, right?
Yeah,
And, I'm 38. I was like, how old am I? I'm 38. And, I used to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be 40. That's so, like, 5 years ago. And now I'm like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
I'm 40 and I still have so much life to live, right? Like, I have
So much life to live.
so much life to live. Like, and I'm like, oh, I'm on my second version of myself. I might have a third and a fourth and a fifth. Who knows what could happen,
Oh, may we
right?
be that lucky.
Like, may we get that lucky. And so this is the same thing. We start talking about our bodies and like our skin sagging and getting, wrinkles and all this stuff. It's like, that's aging. And like how
Yeah,
beautiful that we get the opportunity to age, right?
yeah, yeah,
If we're not aging, we're dying. We're
yeah,
aging, we're dying. That's the
yeah,
only options, right? And like how
yeah,
lucky are we to be able to experience another day and to have another opportunity to see the next version or iteration of ourselves. And so it's always a constant work, and I think for me, it's really surrounding myself with like-minded people. It's following the right people in social media. It's tapping out of social media, honestly.
yes.
Like just get out of there. Let's go read some books. Let's go outside. Let's go do whatever.
Yeah,
Because it's really important to know that and I talked about this before at the beginning, like society is designed to make us feel like we're not enough,
Yeah.
right? Because the
Yeah.
longer we feel like we're not enough, our body's not enough. They can keep selling us thing after thing after thing to fix the
Yeah.
problem. There's a reason the beauty industry is or the diet industry is a 70 billion plus dollar industry. The beauty industry is the same, right? Those systems profit on us not feeling good enough about
Yeah.
ourselves, feeling
Yeah.
unworthy. And so it's not, I want everyone to be really clear that this is really difficult. I'm not saying this in a flippant way. All this work that we're
Yeah.
talking about is difficult work. And still, I think it's one of the most worthwhile things we can do for ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. No, you said that so beautifully, so beautifully. And it's like, it's so interesting when we talk about that onion. It's almost like we get through one thing and then all of a sudden it's like, it almost feels like harder or like you're swimming through like a little bit more mud because you get to the next layer. And so I just want people to know, like, if it feels harder, it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's just because you're getting to that next layer and you're continuing
Hard.
to evolve. Yeah, and it is hard. And it is hard. It is hard. Oh my goodness. Okay. Second book. Do we know? Is it coming out soon? Can you share? Do we know?
Details yet to share
Okay.
specifics, but I'm really excited about it. And I feel like it's just like an evolution or the next iteration
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
liberation. Yeah.
Oh, I cannot wait. And we'll have to have you back on when it comes out. But just
Yeah.
thank you for your incredible, incredible knowledge. I will link the Body Liberation Project in the show notes for anyone who's listening. It is a must read. I have devoured it many times and it is like tattered with like highlights and read parts of it to my daughter. It's just really, really good. Chrissy, where can we find you? ChrissyKing.com.
Yes, ChrissyKing.com and Instagram and TikTok and Threads. I've been threading a lot. It's I am Chrissy King.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Well, thank you for being here. We so appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.